Today's episode is sponsored by Jam.dev. It's developer-friendly bug reports in 2 clicks. It's free and it's fabulous. You're a dev, you work on a team, maybe your team sends you bug reports with no details, maybe text, no screenshot, no console logs, and you end up going back and forth just to get the repro. That's when we introduce Jam.dev. It's a free tool that saves developers a ton of frustration. It'll force your teammates to make the perfect bug report. They literally can't do it wrong because it automatically includes a video of the bug, console logs, network requests, all the information you need, even their network speed. It's super easy to use. It works in Chrome. It works in Edge. They see a bug, they click a button, it makes a ticket, it saves time for them, and it'll save you a lot of hopping on calls and meetings to debug. If you're an engineer and you'd rather spend your time writing code than responding to comments, send your team jam.dev. And for the Hansel Minutes listener, take a look at jam.dev/Scott. Get started with your first year completely free. That's jam.dev/Scott. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Adora Nwodo, who's the author of Cloud Engineering for Beginners and Beginning Azure DevOps. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Thanks for hanging out. I am very well. I'm happy to be chatting with you. I love Azure and I love releasing software applications on Azure. And of course, your first book, Beginning Azure DevOps, is literally called Releasing Software Applications on Azure. And, I love learning about the cloud. So I'm happy to chat with you about modern cloud engineering.
Okay. I'm happy to chat as well. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
I'm curious, how long have you been into web applications? Because I'm noticing more and more people excited about the cloud, but I wonder, were you ever doing non-cloud applications or did you start your career in the cloud? Because for some of us, we did our careers in just regular web hosting, just like put it on a VM somewhere rather than putting it into the cloud itself.
So I've been building web apps. I've had like a whole career thing. I've touched like different parts in tech throughout my career. Professionally, it's been about 7 years. But obviously, as someone in school, in the university, I've done like a lot more, creating a bunch of side projects. And yes, we had those, putting it on like a VM days, getting some kind of web hosting and running with that, FTP to deploy. Like we had that time, right? And then I knew around that time as well, there was already the conversation about like cloud, because truthfully, cloud didn't just like start yesterday. The concept has been around since like the early 2000s. And I read something when I was trying to do research for my book that there was actually a professor that gave a talk at a session in MIT in the late 1900s, 19-something, very late, that we should treat computers the way we treat power, the way we treat water, and how we just like pay and rent stuff. And that's like where the concept of the cloud sort of came from. So the cloud didn't just like pop up out of nowhere. But at the time when I was still doing FTP transfers, I don't think the cloud was as mainstream as it is right now. So yeah, I have like a web developer, web application background, because before I got deep into the cloud in 2019, I was building web apps, mobile apps as well. So I was doing like a bunch of things.
Yeah, that's so funny. FTPing, even now I still have 1 or 2 sites that persist with, old clients that FTP directly from someone's laptop. And that's also not just a cloud problem, that's a DevOps problem, right? Because the rise of DevOps, and we used to call them build servers and then CI/CD and then DevOps as a practice, kind of happened in parallel with the cloud. We started treating computers like utilities, to your point, and then also releasing better. You can FTP into the cloud, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Yeah.
So in your book, Beginning Azure DevOps, you really wanted to get people started on how to go not just and release a software application, but you go from planning, building, testing. You're doing the entire software lifecycle. But it sounds like you remember not being that tidy, just building on your laptop and FTPing. You remember those days?
Yeah, I remember those days like they were yesterday, because it wasn't so far away, to be honest. But yeah, it wasn't just about deploying, but like the entire life cycle. Wanted to make it so that, I mean, I wrote my first book, right, which was the very beginner book, the Cloud Engineering for Beginners book. It was a very small book that people could just read and get excited about the cloud and be sure that, okay, maybe I actually want to pursue a cloud career, right? So the second book for me was more teaching a particular technical concept, because the first one didn't really teach any concepts. It was just more for opening everyone's mind up to the possibility of cloud engineering. This book was more, if you are trying to do, if you're a tester, if you are an engineer, if you are a product manager, because in the software development lifecycle, right, these different skill sets are required in different stages or in different phases of that lifecycle. So wanted to write a book that just wasn't for engineers. Wanted to write a book that was for the different kinds of technical people that make a product ship successfully. So that's why I wrote the book the way I wrote it, and it was centered around Azure DevOps, because Azure DevOps is the tool that I have like a lot of context on when it comes to these things, because I use it every day.
Right. And I think that's a great point that you make, because there's the many roles that exist within the context of the cloud. And if you use DevOps at that center, the hub and spoke, for example, there are those who plan the architecture of the cloud. There are those who manage the build server. There's the boards feature, of course, like the Kanban boards feature of Azure DevOps, as well as automated testing and then ultimately deploying. Those are all different roles. And you're kind of explaining in context how each person or team fits into the life cycle of deploying something into the cloud.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you were moving, as I did, from FTPing to VMs and into the cloud, did you find it initially very intuitive? Because for me, I didn't. I just ended up taking VMs that would run on some server, and then I just ran the VMs in the cloud. So that I didn't really utilize the cloud. It was just a hosting provider in my initial days in the cloud.
I didn't find it intuitive at the beginning. And to be honest, I think that was even what made me want to teach about this thing. One of the reasons was I struggled in the beginning, and then I made a pact with myself that when I eventually learned how to do things properly, I was going to teach, right? And that was what brought me, to writing 2 books a couple of years after. I tried taking like different boot camps multiple times just to actually get a sense of how these things actually worked, but it wasn't easy at the time for me. My entry into cloud engineering properly was through infrastructure engineering, because that was what made a bunch of things clearer for me. I started understanding a bunch of infrastructure resources, why we need them, what they do, and provisioning them, managing them, all of that stuff. And that was how my mind sort of opened into other stuff in that cloud area as well. And it just sort of grew from there. So it wasn't easy in the beginning, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I hear you. I have found the cloud, mostly visualizing what's going on in the cloud, to be challenging. But I understand that, you had a computer when you were 6, your dad brought computers into the house. Computers were in your life from very early, and you decided you were going to be an engineer quite early. And not everyone had that privilege. Not everyone had a PC in the house early on. Do you think it helps you in your work doing releases into the cloud to have physically, installed network cables and installed, like the physicality of having your own computer? For me, I think makes me a better cloud engineer. But there's a generation that you've probably taught and I've taught that has never really even touched anything other than a laptop.
I think it does for me. I used to fix things and break things a lot when I was younger. Even in secondary school, I used to be that person that everyone would bring their laptop to when it has fault. I hated the fact that I was the computer girl and that was my brand, but I mean,
that's a pretty good brand to have. I wouldn't feel bad about that brand.
No, because sometimes I'm trying to do something else, like study for a quiz or something, and someone is coming to tell me, oh, they need me to help them fix something because they broke something and now we need to go find the driver somewhere to install it. It was like a whole thing. But having computers early on has affected how I approach a lot of things. I think it helps me understand how computers work, the underlying workings of computers, operating systems, how things interact. And I think because if you're going to be a cloud engineer, the truth is a cloud is a collection of computers somewhere, right? So to be a good cloud engineer, I think it's important to understand how computers work in general so that you can approach the cloud better. So I think that sort of helped me also, coupled with the fact that my life has been a never ending journey of learning about computers and learning about programming and playing with computers. So a lot of that also contributed to where, we are at the moment. But I think it sort of helps. I think it sort of helps, to be honest.
Yeah. I think the other fun thing about being a teacher of these things is that you never really understand something as well as when you are forced to teach it to people who
Yeah,
don't understand it. So I feel like I understand a topic more when I'm teaching that topic.
I think so too. There are a bunch of things that I have written, and sometimes I think about it and I'm like, before I wrote about this topic, and now that I have written about this topic, I know a lot more about this topic now that I have written something or taught something or giving a talk somewhere. And that's actually why I enjoy doing some of these things, to be honest. I mean, apart from the fact that I'm giving back to the community and it's sort of inspiring people as well, it's also helping me learn and grow in my knowledge because for fear of saying the wrong thing, you go and read to be sure that you understand the subject matter totally before you write or teach a class or something, right? And obviously, as you are reading, you're also learning. So it's a win-win.
Absolutely. You're reasserting your understanding. Like I think it works like this, and I've always thought it works like this, but I'm going to go and triple check and make sure that it truly understands. And then, of course, in writing books, we end up writing and updating source code repositories about samples, and we learn more, and we put those things in practice, which I know that you did with your book as well. Hey friends, are you dealing with excessive context switching in your daily development tasks? Maybe spending too much time looking for that one code snippet that you lost in the chaos of your development workflow. You're not alone. Even if you do surface that snippet in your Notes app, or you find it in Teams, do you remember the context behind it? Check out Pieces for Developers. We use this to manage development materials across your workflows. This is the tool that exists between your tools. Now, it seamlessly integrates with your IDE, with your browser, and with your collaboration tool like Slack or Teams. And it makes it easy to save and search, share and reference, and reuse code snippets throughout your work in progress journey. Now, my favorite feature is Pieces Copilot. This sets custom context with your personal code base, and you can ask it who you can contact for a particular issue. And it's completely on device. You can use this Copilot without an internet connection. Super cool. Check it out. Pieces.app/Scott. You can download the desktop application for free and start boosting your developer productivity today. So you had access to computers at an early age. You physically were the computer, your words, the computer girl who had the ability to fix your friends' laptops. I did as well. When you are teaching, because I know you have a group on the side from your job called Nexus Scale, and you teach classes, you have these books online. This is kind of your side hustle. Do you find that other people have had that kind of access as well? The people you're teaching have built their own computers, or are these folks that have only ever interacted with computers in the form of their phones?
Most people have only interacted with computers in the form of their phones, to be honest, because you need to have access to the computer before you even decide that you want to play with it, right? And one of the things we're realizing now is that a lot of people that want to do tech or get into tech careers are not able to do it the way they would like because they don't have access, or rather, they've not had access to all of those resources in the past. And now we're working towards getting that access for them. So for some people, yes, you'd hear things like, oh, yes, I got a computer when I was, young as well. And I have grown to love computers and that's why I'm here. There are lots of people that have similar stories, but there's also a lot of people that the only form of technology they've interacted with is through their phones. Some people even code on their phones, right? They write Java on their phones. They write JavaScript on their phones, HTML. It's a wonder, right? Because I know that I would struggle if I had to do that, but people are doing it because of the tenacity and, what they currently have access to. So
I actually had a young man This is right now, this episode that we're recording is somewhere in the 900s. This will be like episode 900 and something.
Oh,
Back in
wow.
episode 615 in 2018, I was talking to a young man named Elvis Chidera, who is a Nigerian young man who wrote his first app in 2012 on a Nokia phone with no keyboard, just with the numbers. And he wrote a whole thing on a
Wow.
J2ME phone. That's the phone that he had. And his argument was, this is what I have available. I'm going to use what I have available. And I think that that's the kind of ingenuity and the kind of engineering cleverness that we need in a time when we're being asked by management and by people who have budget to do more with less. You want to work, you want to work within constraints. So hey, I have a phone, let's see if I can code on that. And now even on iPhones and Android, there's whole playgrounds where you can go and learn how to code. So it's not ideal, but there's definitely no excuses.
Yeah, true.
So when you're working in cloud engineering and you're trying to go and design something in a modern cloud, you had said, just like I had, that your initial understanding of the cloud was, VMs. As you start moving into things like platform as a service, Azure App Service, and then Kubernetes, those concepts are starting to stack on top of each other. I'm curious how to teach that. Like, I can teach VMs, I can teach platforms, but when you start getting into orchestration and things like that, it gets pretty hairy pretty quickly.
Yeah, it does. To be honest, even up till now, there's a lot with Kubernetes that I struggle with because it's crazy, right? And as you grow, it gets deeper. We start with, okay, let's start with teaching you the cloud service models. And then from there, we go to, okay, you can do static web apps, you can do app service, and there's this thing called serverless architecture. So there's something called function apps. Go try it out. And then the next thing, we're talking about containers and ACI, ACR, AKS. So it's like a lot to take in sometimes. And I think that's one of the reasons why I would always say that understanding how computers work, if anyone comes to me and actually tells me that they want to get into tech or engineering, before they start talking about programming languages, I tell them to take a basic CS course, first of all, because it helps you when you get those things on networking, operating systems, multi-threading. There's a way that you would understand computers that helps the rest of your journey seamless. It's like laying the right foundation and then building up on it. It's harder for your house to sink that way, right? So, starting with all of those things, if you're going to learn about Kubernetes, why don't you learn about containerization as a concept on its own, and then learn about the microservices architecture as a concept on its own, and then start thinking about how you can use a tool to manage different containers that you have. And then Kubernetes is now what comes next. But it shouldn't be a thing of you open your computer and you go type what is Kubernetes and what to start learning you from there. It will get really confusing pretty quickly. So I would say that yes, it is hard, right? Because there are a bunch of things to learn. And as you grow, they get bigger, right? There's more stuff to learn. But I would say starting from the beginning, getting the basics out of the way first would make the journey a lot easier for anybody interested in doing that.
So I really appreciate and respect that you said that, because sometimes I feel alone when I say stuff like that. And I worry, because you and I are of a different generation, and I worry that maybe I'm being a gatekeeper. I'm saying to someone who wants to get excited about tech that you should know what happens underneath. Yes, you could open a terminal and type, cube, cuddle, whatever, and do all of your Kubernetes just by memorizing at the command line, but you're advocating for understanding what's underneath. I see it in your books. I see it in your cloud engineering pamphlet that you came out with. Do you ever have people push back on you, whether it be on social media or in your classes, when you're saying, I think you need to go deeper and learn the basics? And they're saying, why are you making me learn this boring stuff? I just want to be a Kubernetes engineer.
So I've not had anyone push back. What I've had though is, initially you get the questions where they ask you, I want to learn XYZ. How do I go about that? I want to become an Azure cloud engineer. And I'm like, no, don't be an Azure cloud engineer. Be a cloud engineer. Learn about cloud engineering. Yeah, yes, you can pick up Azure along the way. You can pick up AWS too. You can pick up GCP and all of the rest. That's great. But don't tie your knowledge to just one thing because you use that thing to learn about the concept as opposed to learning the concept itself before moving on because it will cost you later. Imagine you work at a job for 3 years where you've been doing only Azure things and you've just somehow been so lucky you've been finding your way around it. And then you want to move into a new job and they're saying, oh, we use AWS here. And you're like, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm not interested because only Azure I know and it's only Azure I'm interested in. You don't need to put yourself in that kind of box. So I guess one thing that I've learned to do over time is to explain to people why I say most of the things that I say so that it sort of makes sense. And I think like in those smaller conversations or when I'm making those videos and I'm saying what I'm saying just once and for all, I try to communicate the why, like, okay, why is this thing important? I've never had any serious pushbacks. I expect that they might come in the future. I mean, life is funny, right? I wouldn't be shocked if they do. But right now, no.
That's cool. I appreciate that. It's so important because, like in your foundational book, the first thing you started with isn't the command line. It's not going and learning about Kubernetes. It's let's talk about a brief history of computing and the internet, right? Like if you don't understand
Yeah,
TCP/IP, then you're going to have a problem. And to your point about if you only have Azure or AWS on your resume, and then someone wants you to learn GCP, and you're like, I don't know. That's like saying I can't drive a Toyota. I only know how to drive a Honda. And
exactly.
what are we doing? What are we doing?
Yeah, I agree. Like, this is the perfect analogy, to be honest.
Yeah, you need to be able to drive the cloud no matter whose cloud it is and no matter what brand it is. Because fundamentally, we acknowledge, to your point, it is containers, and containers are little tiny computers or little VMs. And if they want to think about them as little laptops running in the cloud, fine. But they need to understand multi-threading, memory, all of the different things. Computers are still computers, even after all these years. The parts are the same, and I think people sometimes forget about that stuff. I also think that people should do more than just samples. Have you noticed that a lot of people who are just getting started have trouble moving beyond the basics, moving beyond the samples? How do you get folks to go from like building to-do apps in the cloud to modern cloud engineering and having actually sophisticated experience? How do you get that experience?
That's exactly what Nexascale is doing. And that's why I created Nexascale. Because everybody is building to-do apps. So it's like there's a disconnect, right? Tech companies are hiring and basically continuously hiring because they've not found the kinds of people that they need. I'm not talking about like really senior roles now. You'd say things like, oh, we're hiring. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that would still come and tell you that I'm looking for jobs and I can't find one. There's a disconnect somewhere. Something is happening, right? Because a lot of people only know what they know from maybe the projects that they worked on during their boot camp and things like that. They've not expanded on those things. They've not built on that knowledge and stuff like that. And for me, it's like one thing I tell people is that if you are not able to sit at a table because nobody invited you there, go and build your own. And you can sit on your own table and you can even invite other people to your table as well. In the context of projects, and this is something I did a lot when I was starting up my career as well, where I collaborated with a bunch of my friends. We'll build something together. We'll have the next idea. We'll build another project and we will share it. And sometimes we'll publicize these projects and we'll get real users for these projects. And that way we have something to talk about. We would get into problems because people are using it and not using it in the way they're supposed to use it. Somebody will try to hack it. You start thinking about security. Those things open your mind beyond building like the random to-do apps, right? So we created Nexascale to connect people to opportunities straight out of the bat. So sometimes we have like some partners where if people need interns, we give them interns and things like that. But majorly, we're creating a community that encourages people to just build. So people are building different projects. There are different community projects, and it's like things are built for the community by the community. And we're not just building projects that people use and dump. We have a bunch of things that we're going to be releasing very soon that I'm so excited for the people building it, and I can't wait to share it with the world because they're really super amazing projects. But we're building things that people will use as well. And as people use those things, then we have to think of people maintaining those things as well. And it's going to be good for the builders and the maintainers, like all of the contributors to those projects. And while you wait to get your first full-time job, you're already putting yourself on, first of all, impactful projects that are used within the community, and you are gaining experience over time, right? So I used to preach a lot a couple of years ago to tell people why they should build, but I realized that I wasn't really going anywhere with preaching and nobody was really listening to me. So I woke up one day and I decided to create a whole community, a whole organization centered around motivating people to build. And I've realized that now it's easier to get people to build because there is a platform that empowers them to do so. And that's actually just what we're doing there.
That is really good advice. I think I'm really tired of seeing portfolios that are tic-tac-toe games and Mancala games and Hangman and all, you're not going to deploy that and care about it. So you want to find a project that you care about. It could be a scheduler for your kids' sports. It could be for your church or your mosque. It could be a chat system for your family. Like whatever it is, you have to actually care that it helps people. You have to build it. And also, like any garden, you have to water your garden. You got to pull the weeds. I really think people learn a lot about cloud software by keeping it running. Because if you just put a sample in the cloud, no one visits it. It never falls over. I learn a lot every time my podcast site goes down. You know what I mean? I get a notification.
Because you have to figure out,
And I got to figure out, I got to debug it because it's not just about the deploying. It's about the planning, building, testing, releasing, and doing that kind of work with a thing that I care about, keeping my website running, causes me to be both the programmer and the release engineer and the SRE and the site reliability engineer.
Yeah, I agree. And I've said this thing before, right? I don't think the hardest part of computing or products in general is building. I think it's getting that product to stay up.
Yeah, it is.
The maintenance part is no part is easy, to be fair, but I think the maintenance part is really, really, really challenging. I think we need to give SREs a lot more credit than they get.
I was trying to explain to someone recently what bit rot was and the idea that bits rot. And they're like, what do you mean bits rot? I mean, they're just bits. Like the computer just goes forever, right? And it's like security updates and web frameworks update and JavaScript changes and the browser changes. And I've had situations where some JavaScript I wrote 10 years ago breaks one day. The JavaScript didn't change. Chrome changed.
Yeah.
And then I start dealing with those kind of things. And just life happens. And that's where you learn is in the actual running and maintaining of the sites.
Yeah, sure.
I'm glad. So Nexuscale is at nexuscale.org, and you've got virtual communities, study groups. Folks can fill out the form there and get involved. Are you focusing on certain kinds of engineers or certain locations in the world where you want certain kinds of kids or certain kinds of young people? But you also have a focus on transitioning into tech from existing careers.
Yeah, so we're mostly focused on people that are transitioning into tech. They've taken a couple of courses, they have boot camps, and they're trying to transition. So we sort of like create that platform for them to build projects so that their portfolios can grow, and then we can connect them to people that can hire them. But we're not able to connect everybody because we have like over 9,700 community members. So we connect the few we can, and then we just empower the rest to build stuff, right?
I got
so
you.
Yes, people that are transitioning, people that have also learned maybe entry level, not necessarily transitioning, but let's say someone is 18, for example, they've learned how to code, they're writing with Flutter, React Native, they've only been in tech, but now they've learned how to code, and now they're trying to get those opportunities for themselves as well, so that eventually they start their careers. They are also the kinds of people that we target as well. So early stage people generally that are not complete newbies, at least they know how to code. Yeah, we help them, like motivate them to build and connect them to opportunities for them to build more.
Right, getting over that hump. Because I know that a lot of times in tech, I always describe the idea that it's 3 a.m, it's a random Tuesday night, and you're stuck. Community is the kind of people who can unstick you, whether it be a question or a bit of motivation or I built a thing, but I don't know how to deploy it. I want to take it to the next level. I'm not a newbie, but I'm also not a senior. And how do I get over that hump and make it happen? And it sounds like your virtual community is a place for folks to connect and to learn and to build.
Yeah, we're trying to make it so that people get a safe space for them to, do all of that. And that was actually even how we started. So initially when we started, it was a study group before motivating people to build as a program that we've started enforcing. The way we used to motivate people to build was just by creating a safe space so think Stack Overflow, but in private, right? Creating a safe space where people could come to Slack and say, hey, I'm having this problem, I need help. And you could jump on virtual study groups with like 5 other people and everyone peer programs that thing, you figure it out and that's it. So that's sort of like how we started. But then over time, when you do these things, interact with people, learn about the community, you realize the specific problems that people are facing, and then you can design solutions around it. So over time, it became what it is now. But initially, it was actually just to create that community to help people solve their problems when they get into problems.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
You can learn about Adora and her community and the work that she's doing at adoranwodo.com. That's ADORANWODO.com. And from there, you can click over to Nexuscale, as well as her books, Cloud Engineering for Beginners and Beginning Azure DevOps. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.